Welcome to the Happy Rebel podcast, where we explore the realms of finding your calling, living your values, and doing the work of self-healing. Through candid conversations with fellow seekers, we'll uncover ideas and concepts that challenge, expand, and empower us to embrace our authentic selves and live with intention. Hi there, I'm Kelly Street, owner of Happy Rebel and your guide on this journey. I'm known for my insatiable curiosity and tendency for pushing boundaries. I've always been a challenger, eager to question the status quo and explore the uncharted territories of personal growth. So join me as we navigate the twists and turns of life's journey, seeking out the wisdom and insights that illuminate our path towards fulfillment and rebellion against the ordinary. Before we get started, I want to remind you to connect with me on Instagram at Happy Rebel, where you can ask questions and share your thoughts. Remember, you are never alone on your path to becoming a happy rebel. This is the Happy Rebel Podcast. Take a moment to settle into your space, whether you're sitting, standing, or lying down. Close your eyes if it feels comfortable, or let your gaze soften. Take a deep breath in through your nose, filling your lungs completely, and exhale slowly, releasing any tension you're carrying. As you breathe, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast cave. The air is cool, still, and quiet. With each inhale, feel yourself drawing in the grounding energy of the earth around you. With each exhale, let go of anything that feels heavy or unnecessary, like you're emptying your pockets before stepping into the unknown. Allow yourself to notice the stillness, the darkness, the possibility of the cave. This is a space of retreat, reflection, and renewal. Take one more deep breath, feeling the steady rhythm of your body, and gently bring your awareness back to this moment, ready to explore the conversation ahead. And let's begin. Welcome, Scott. I am so excited to have you here, and I would love for you to introduce yourself to everybody so they can get to know you a little bit more like I do.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. So I have the Sky Cave Darkness Retreat Center in Southern Oregon. We have 3 dark retreat caves here that we've been using for the last 5 years. We've had, at this point, over 500 different people who have come through here, and it's quite a eclectic, dynamic group of people, from celebrities and high net worth individuals to the psychonauts and people who are on a spiritual journey and seeking enlightenment or various other spiritual endeavors, to Christians from Ohio, to people who have never meditated or done yoga or plant medicine, or just the whole range of humans, and all going into, in a sense, the same exact experience, and yet having a completely different experience. And I guess, to give like a picture of the dark retreat, like, it's a 250, 300 square foot room with a bathtub, bathroom. There's a yoga mat and a foam roller. There's a zero gravity reclining chair with a weighted blanket. There's a little low table with a cushion and a bed. And there's a candle and a little red book light, something that we'll kind of touch on as we get into, like, why would we have a candle and a red book light in dark retreat? But we'll kind of go into that. And so twice a day, I come up and bring all the food in the evening, and there's a check-in where we converse through the door, where we can hear each other through the wall, and then also in the morning. And then typically, like, the average stay here is a total of 5 days, 6 nights, with the first 24 hours for somebody to really just settle in, get accustomed to being in the dark, feel familiar with being on the land. And so somebody arrives in the afternoon, they tend to go into the dark that night, and then have that next day to kind of weave in and out of the dark. And then there's a 2-hour session with Adrian, somatic-based intro prep session that kind of distills the many years of experience in being with dark retreats and dark retreatants. And orients them in different ways that they wouldn't really imagine to orient in entering into the dark retreat, which is a completely different experience, not really like anything else. And then Adrian also does a 2 hour session on the other end after somebody emerges from the dark. They come out in the morning, and then they have a session with Adrian in the afternoon, and that whole day to kind of integrate before they leave the next day. In the early days, when we really didn't know what we were doing or what I was doing, I was here, it was just me for the first 2 years, and then Adrian came on after that, and things really took a dramatic change as she brought a whole uh, different level of depth and vision of like what was happening within people's nervous systems that I wasn't recognizing at the time. And in those early days, it was kind of, I overlaid my experience of what it was like for me initially going into the dark and doing spiritual work, which was very masculine oriented and male dominated in terms of the qualities of achieving spirituality and kind of being strong, getting through it. And so there was a lot that I wasn't picking up on, as I wasn't picking up on in myself or in others. And at that time, it was kind of, we didn't have a length of time. People came for however much they wanted. We had people here for 5 days, 10 days, 21 days, 30 days, 40 days. And
Wow.
and I was not able to really notice the level of threat and like trapped charge in people's bodies that was still there, that was going on the whole time. How it was almost like without proper support, the dark retreat becomes a container for reinforcing and developing your coping mechanisms and strategies, which like we have enough of that in the world. But without someone else having eyes and ears on your nervous system, because we end up getting into a way of surviving, and we're really good at surviving, we tend to not notice so much what's going on. We're almost like there's a membrane that almost doesn't even allow us to register what's happening. And so when Adrian first came on, I would share a bit when someone came out of the dark of like, this person, they had this amazing experience, they came out of the dark, it was so beautiful, and then she'd have a session with them and she would just share like, that's really just not what was going on. There was so much built up charge still in their system, there was a lot of fear, it was really hard and difficult. But once that initial wave of them coming out and finally being saved from the desert, so to speak, like what was really there, Adrian's deeply perceptive and able to really open that up so people can actually become aware of what's happening within them that they weren't. There's a lot more that we started to see, that I started to see. And so we started to shorten the length because we could tell that longer was almost never deeper. And where there's something about, and we'll get into it, about the threat responses and what happens in the dark for everybody on some level. And that when you're under threat, especially in the dark, and it's a long time, like it feels 2 or 3 days in the dark feels like an eternity, but like 5, 10, 20,
Yes, it
30,
does.
it's just like, it's like forget about it. Like 2 or 3 days is long enough, but when you really start, it almost becomes like this inescapable threat that's not going to end. 2 or 3 days feels like it's not going to end, but there's something of like an unconscious overwhelm when there's a lot of time in the dark that has somebody unconsciously going right into their coping strategies, managing their experience, trying to fix it, change it. And then there's people who are like more oriented in the transforming or awakening, and like there's almost a contracted movement in that, which we can kind of explore. So we began to really shorten the time. And as we did that, I could see the people who were in 20, 30, 40 days were not having any deeper of an experience of the people who were in for 2 or 3 days. And really the people who were in for 2 or 3 days, there's something in their system that relaxed more. Managing 30 or 40 days of something that's uncomfortable is a lot harder than managing something for 2 or 3 days of something that's uncomfortable. There's just more space. And so as things evolved, it was then 5 days, 4 days, and now it's just like a standard 3 days in the dark that we find tends to be for most people the sweet spot, that like it takes time to settle in. There's a big melatonin dump in the beginning where you're sleeping a lot. Maybe that we could even, in the beginning, since it's all dark, there's a huge melatonin dump. And so for many people, the beginning can tend to be fairly sleepy. There's a lot of time to sleep, to rest, and then that period passes. For some people, there's a period of novelty. Sometimes it only lasts a few seconds, and for some people it could go a few hours or a day where they're just free of responsibility, there's nothing to do. That gets old very quickly for most people, and then it moves into a whole different phase. And one of the things that happens in a longer dark retreat, around the third or fourth night, the brain chemistry shifts and it becomes really hard to sleep. And
Yes,
for some people, that even
it does.
happens. Yeah, right. And then so when you get near the end and it's really hard to sleep in the dark, it adds another level of pressure because there's no escape, and it's way more challenging and way more uncomfortable than anyone imagines. And it's way more challenging and way more uncomfortable for the people who feel like they're prepared. There's also this, like, when somebody comes in and they feel like they're prepared and they've got it and it's going to be just fine, it's almost, there's a level of posturing that they go into to keep it together. The people who are more easily able to just like come undone and be vulnerable and exposed, almost there's something that they fall into when they come undone in the dark, as opposed to when somebody's holding it together. And that's something, yeah, we can unpack during this call, of the threat responses and of how different nervous systems are affected in the dark, and then how we then respond within that.
Yeah, that's great. I love this overview. I'm like nodding the whole time. I'm just, yes, in it with you because it all is so much of my experience that I had in everything that you said.
And so
And
we didn't say anything that you've been here and how long ago you were here. And so for some context.
yeah, and regular listeners know because I did an episode all about the darkness retreat. But yeah, I was there and I went into the dark on Halloween, October, and then came out weirdly on election day. So it was this really interesting timing. So it's been a few months, and I will say that the first, I guess we can just go to this part. The first month coming out of the darkness, coming home, coming back into the world and into my life was really challenging. And I noticed that there was just a lot of depression that came up for me again, a lot of sadness. There was a lot of failure that I felt like I was working through from my time in the darkness, and that it wasn't easy, and that I had such a hard time with it basically, and really kind of sat in that muck for about a month afterwards. And now I'm kind of coming through that, but not even kind of. Now I'm through that and I'm back to baseline.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, that part of it being challenging, there's never been one person who's come through here and was just like, whoa, that was a lot easier than I thought. Like, there's just not, nobody says that. Almost everyone says or feels like that was way harder than I ever imagined it could be. And people imagine it to be difficult, but it's just not. It's hard to imagine how it's difficult because you're just alone in the dark. I mean, for my first experience, I went into the dark solo my first time in 2000. Prior to my first time in the dark, I had spent probably 2.5 years alone up in the mountains, mostly in southern Baja, also in Mount Shasta, Northern California. And that probably 6 months before I went in, I was 40 days up in the mountains, right where I did my dark retreat. I was 40 days solo. My wife, Jill, brought my food further up the mountain, so we didn't see each other at all. I fasted for a couple weeks. I would sit on this same rock meditating 12, 14, 16 hours a day. I went in feeling very well prepared, really genuinely enjoying solitude, and yet not knowing how to come undone, not really knowing the qualities of receptivity, of softness, of vulnerability, of being exposed. I knew how to like get through, how to endure, how to control my mind, how to manage my experience, how to create ecstasy and bliss in my system. I was very good at that, but that just didn't matter in the dark because you just can't fill the void. Doesn't matter how good you are at filling the void, how amazing you are at achieving things in the world, how amazing you are at achieving spirituality, you can't fill the timeless nature of the void that is the darkness. And you can fill it for 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 hours, and then you can maybe sleep for 10 hours, but then you got 4 hours which you're actually confronted with where you really are when you're not posturing or achieving or creating or controlling or managing. You're just like, this is where you're at. And that's really, it's really, it can be really defeating, especially when we feel like we've really got it together. Which is why I said earlier that the people who tend to not feel like they have it together, which tend to be the people who come who uh, don't view themselves as spiritual or aren't on a spiritual journey or a healing journey, and they're just here out of curiosity. I don't want to say those people have an easier time, but like there is an ease because there's less posturing. So there's more of a just like, I have no idea. And so there's this receptivity, and there's more of a simplicity and ease of being with what's here as opposed to looking for something special. And when I first went in that first solo time in the dark, I got totally slammed. I was astounded by how hard it was because I thought I was very prepared. And I could actually see in me how I oriented in meditation at that time. I could feel the contraction around it in my system, where it was like I had never really seen it as a mechanism of control. It was like I had spiritualized it, and it had elements of that. Not to write that off, there was sincerity, there was a depth that extended beyond just kind of my mind and my box of who I was, but it almost created a different box that was controlled and contrived through myself, and I could feel it in the dark. And so formal meditation practice it didn't feel right. And that's kind of what I used to fill my time with while I was alone. And so I was kind of at a loss of like how to be in the dark. I didn't know I didn't have those qualities at the time, but I didn't really have the quality to just simply soften, open, and receive. And I mean, most people who come here don't have that quality to really be in that for seemingly an endless amount of time. And when we are in that, we don't get to choose what we're experiencing. We don't get to choose a lofty, peak, grand spiritual experience. We don't get to choose achieving greatness. It is a choiceless awareness. It is just this open receptivity. And so it's really confronting, really vulnerable, and it's really exposing. And it can feel very overwhelming and threatening. And so there then becomes, when we start to open and we begin to feel that overwhelm and the threat, what do we then do? And so there are different ways that we support people in orienting in the dark as they begin to confront themselves and parts of themselves that they've actually never seen before. But once they see it, they can then be like, this is informing this whole part of my life. I do this because I feel this in the background and I had no idea.
Yes. And in talking about those responses that come up that you notice, that was one of the truly great things that you and Adrian did to prepare me coming in. Was there were all these conversations in the day before really going into the dark about the fear responses that come up, fight, flight, freeze. And for me, I would even say fawn showed up in the dark. And it was so healing to have had that conversation ahead of time. And then when it did show up and I could just notice and be with, I am wanting to fight my way out of here. I'm wanting to argue with Scott when he shows up with my dinner tonight. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you see and receive people's experiences of those fear responses.
Yeah, totally. And if the sun keeps creeping, maybe I'll move, but for now, I think we're good. So there are like we can all imagine if we're in a dark room that there's going, maybe not everyone, but for many people, they can imagine how uncomfortable it may be. Some people, it may invoke a feeling of fear. And for other people, they're just like, I wouldn't be afraid. I'm going to love it. All that aside of like the kind of imagined fears that may or may not be there, there is like the animal in us which feels stimulated when it's in the dark, because you're in the dark and that part of us is constantly scanning the environment for threat. And when you go in the dark, you can't scan your environment for a threat. Even though you went in the room, you looked around, you checked under the bed, there's nothing there. You shut the door, there's a lock on the door, the lights are out. Cognitively, you know that you're safe, but the animal in us is actually just not sure. And it doesn't work linearly to convince that animal inside that it's safe. And then there's muffled sounds at times. It's quiet 95% of the time, and then it's buried in the earth. And so a deer might walk on the roof. One of the rocks on the side of the building may shift. Like there's something, and it really can stimulate a threat response where we feel threatened. And that happens on some level for everybody. There's a threat response, no matter how strong and mighty someone may be or how much time they've spent alone. It's just this, the animal is stimulated. And when that happens, there's this natural response to manage the fear and to convince ourselves that we're fine. And so some people take the cognitive route of like, I'm fine, I'm alone in here, it's totally fine. And that almost is like dismisses the animal that's scared. It dismisses the little boy or the little girl inside that's afraid. And it's like, there's nothing under the bed, there's no monsters in your closet, you're fine. And in that moment, there's almost this movement to dissociating. There's a movement away from the body, because if you're honest and you're authentic, you're scared, or there's a part of you that's scared. And for a lot of us, especially men in our culture, being afraid is just, it's actually not even an option. And so it's going to be, you almost have more working against you to be honest in the dark. And for somebody who's spiritually oriented, there's another element. Like you've got all these tools to work through fear, to overcome it, to do some breath work, like to do a meditation or a visualization. Like fear, again, in that context, is almost not okay. You can manage it somehow. And so then again, there's this movement to manage, to fix, to change what's actually happening. And that movement to fix, manage, and change tends to be a movement of contraction, of armoring, which is going to insulate us from what's naturally, spontaneously, and truly here right now. And so there is this membrane that everybody passes through in the dark when they genuinely settle in. And one of those membranes is feeling threatened, feeling some kind of fear in the body. And that then registers for people. The response to the threat looks different for everyone in the dark. And we're very limited with our options in the dark. So how fight, flight, freeze, and fawn looks different for everyone in the dark. Like for freeze, somebody tends to not really want to leave the bed. And this isn't like when somebody's sleeping. It tends to be like you're awake, and if you were to get out of the bed, it feels a little eerie and uncomfortable to get out of the bed. So there's like quick movements. There's the dash to the bathroom, or like taking a bath may or may not feel comfortable, but the bed, it's the life raft. It is just where you want to be, and you feel safe and comfortable. And I think I probably spent the first dark retreat I did solo was in a very small space. I didn't have a bed, but so freeze, I probably was in freeze, but I didn't have the orientation to notice it at that time. My first few dark retreats, I was definitely in freeze and had absolutely no idea. And I also had, which we've seen a handful of people come after me who have also been here, who like we're in these spiritual states of quietness and stillness, but it was really freeze. But because they were spiritually oriented and were skilled at controlling their mind and meditating, there was a stillness, but it was like it was some form of freeze. And in my early days in the dark, I would spend most of my time in the bed. And for me, I had rationalized it as this is the most comfortable place. I'm comfortable here. I get out of the bed. I just don't feel so comfortable. And who cares? Why would I spend time in the room? I'm just going to stay in bed. And I was in deep stillness, really quiet, peaceful, calm. I felt like um, that everything was great. And I had no idea that there was a part of me that was really numb and dissociated and in freeze. And that was the first probably 3 or 4 times I went into the dark, which in those early days, it was for 10 days. And it wasn't until we had somebody come and they went in the dark. I think I'm going to try to, maybe I'll scoot forward and it'll give me a little bit more shade, but maybe not. There was someone who came and when I had the check-ins, I could hear them, but their voice was really distant. And because I had met them before they went in, I wasn't, and we hadn't, Adrian really hadn't quite mapped out fight, flight, and freeze and what it typically looks like, and beginning to point it out to people and myself of how to start to notice it and support people when they're in it. And so I couldn't tell. Adrian was just beginning to explore it more. And I couldn't tell if she was in freeze or just really deep. And from how she was talking to me, I could hear she was always in the bed. She wasn't eating that much. And when she came out, she was like, whoa, that was such a deep experience. She was so happy. She was like, it was so quiet. It felt like really calming. And then it wasn't until her session with Adrian after that she realized she was actually in freeze the whole time. There was some way in her session that she was sharing that, like, she could tell when Adrian would kind of lean in a certain way that she felt threatened and wanted to move back. And she could begin to see the coldness and the membrane that she was in that was kind of frozen and insulated. And then when I heard Adrian some other time shortly after that sharing with somebody in the beginning when she used to share about freeze, of how you don't really want to leave the bed, I was like, oh, that's totally what I've been doing. And I just had no idea. And that this happens all the time for people in the dark, is they go into some kind of, and if it's not freeze, it could be meditation and breath work. It could be prayer. I mean, it could be working out. It could be anything. It could be fantasizing about how amazing someone's life is. These can
Yeah.
all, now they don't have to be, but they can be mechanisms for managing overwhelm and a sense of feeling threatened. And I happened to, some months later, I was then going in the dark again. At this point, I'd shortened my time in the dark to 3 or 4 days after witnessing so many people go through. And I was like, I'm not going to stay in bed. I'm going to actually move around the room a lot more now. I was way more comfortable. I had really began at that point, this was a couple of years ago now, to dive much more into somatics. So I was way more oriented in my body. And I was like, I'm going to sit in the middle of the room. Like, I was all over the room, but I could tell like I really just didn't want to be in the middle of the room. And I sat down right in the middle of the room and my whole chest caved in. And it was like so much pressure pressing in to this, my core. And there was no story. There was no, there were no thoughts that were like with it. It was just sat down in the middle of the room and my whole body tightened up. I could then see my initial response was to do some breath work, to breathe through it, to like all of a sudden I was then in just this response to feeling threatened. It took me a little while to then even notice what I was doing, which is again where support really comes in, because somebody feels that threat response, they immediately go into managing it, and they don't know that because that's what's having them actually feel safe. If they weren't trying to manage it, they would realize that they are feeling threatened. And so I spent another time around the room. Every time I'd come back and sit in the center of the room, my whole chest would come in, would cave in. And so that was a real long tangent from freeze of that is one. And it doesn't mean that somebody doesn't have to leave the bed. Some people are really more functional in their freeze, and so they may go about the room, but there is this, like, there's not much body awareness, there's a numbness, there's not much feeling in the body. And for some of those people there's a lot more boredom because there's just not much happening. And you know, there's something to be said about where you get points in the world for being able to endure hard things, to be able to overcome, to just like really grind it out. And that's good for achieving in the world, but like genuinely being connected to like what's happening and to like deeper levels within us, it creates such a membrane that there's just not that much true access. And it's really like the people who come who are overwhelmed and like may even have like panic attacks or like are scared, if they stay with it and they're responsive to the support and they're able to really settle a bit, there's so much more access there because there's such a deep well of feeling, as opposed to somebody who comes and they've got it and they're like doing fine, but it's really because of the managing. There's only so far, there's only so deep that can go because there's such a wall between what they're in and how they're managing and what's really happening. And
Yes.
so, fight, which you could probably share some of your experiences around that, where there's a lot of anger that comes up. And it could be somebody spending hours just remembering everyone that did them wrong, everyone that harmed them, and then there's also anger at me. I think you
Yeah.
even asked me, like, I don't know what your
Yes.
question was. It was something like, do I have pleasure for like locking people up in the rooms, and like maybe I was messing with you and purposely coming late with the food, and do I enjoy doing that? And I was like, whoa, she's
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. There was this moment where I knew that you were coming. I didn't know. I felt like you were probably coming soon to bring the food. And I was just walking around the space and I had this thought drop in, and the thought was, "Huh, I kind of feel like Scott's keeping me here in a prison." And I went, that's like fight. That's like I'm feeling like he's a jailer and that I'm stuck here and wanting to get out and that he's keeping me here. And but where Fawn comes in with it and just noticing that wave of going through each of those threat responses, I thought he's really going to like it when I tell him this. He's going to think this is really funny that I had this thought. And so I thought I was going to be so charming, like when you came in and I said, "So Scott, I had this thought wondering if you realize that you're kind of a jailer here." And you so intelligently and intuitively were like, "What's coming up for you? Like, what are you noticing in your body?" And
Mm,
you slowed me down to really be with that fear and feeling of stuckness and being trapped that was coming up.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into, we could circle back to the other threat responses of like what happens. So there is this threat that everyone feels on some level, and although some of the people who are more kind of fit into the freeze, numb, dissociated category actually might not even feel it because they're numb. And so, and the people who go into fight and to flight, they're not consciously aware. I mean, most people aren't consciously aware that they're feeling the threat unless they're in some kind of panic or have been oriented to start like being aware that this may happen. Then there's some more awareness of it and there's permission to have it, because a lot of people come and they feel like they're supposed to be having some spiritual experience, but they're really just scared. And like on some level, like most some people have to some degree, there's fawning. They're going to want to tell me how good it is, what's happening that's great. No one wants to just talk about how bad it is. There's some people, but most people, that's just not kind of their persona. And so there's almost not that invitation to even share what's challenging, because I'm supposed to be having some spiritual experience or some emotional breakthrough, but I'm really just scared or bored. And so what happens in someone's system when that threat and that discomfort's there is, I think I'm just going to embrace the sun and come back.
Yes, do it. Embrace the
Um,
dark and embrace the light. That's
there we go.
that's the whole
I'll
happy
just,
rebel thing. So you're
I'll just
good.
embrace. Okay. one of the things that happens when someone's in there is that, like you said, that they feel trapped. It's an inescapable threat. And this is something that we've been exploring and noticing over the last year, that most people, even if they notice that they're feeling threatened and uncomfortable, they won't leave because there's so much shame of being a failure and having failed themselves, failed their friends, failed their followers, failed whoever it is. There's so much shame that it's not even an option to leave. And so they might as well be locked in. Like you would even, like, you feel like you're a jailer and you've locked me in here, like the door's unlocked, we've showed you the light that's in there, like there's all the options, but because of how it's organized in our system, it's not an option, so it feels like we're trapped in here. And for most people, it's not obviously thought through like this. It just presents in their system that it's not even an option to leave, and they're maybe not even aware that it's not an option. It's just not even on the table. And so when the discomfort, when the overwhelm, when the threat presents, it's an inescapable threat. And if you're in a situation in an inescapable threat, you are going to have to cope and manage in some way. Laying down and just opening is not really going to be a response unless you're maybe in the enlightened category, to just let the threat take you. And so this is where we've really started to unpack with people when they arrive that there's a little red book light in here. That's right here. There's a candle. There's the lights too. You can always pull the towel from the door. And there's this really, no matter who it is, in the early days, I used to just share it with people who I thought maybe would need it. But then I realized actually everyone needs that permission, because there's people who I wouldn't share it with and it would come up. And also because in those early days, there's like I said, there's almost points given to, like, in the world, of the people who are strong and capable and can do it, but it tends to be from a postured way. It's not really this sense of grounded safety and openness. It's actually because there's so much armor. And then so for some people, that armor gets exposed in there and they could see that it's not real, and they could sense the threat, especially with experienced support that's able to reflect with people. They can begin to see their mechanisms in ways that they couldn't before. So now we share it with everybody. And for some people, it's just enough for them to have permission, like they know they can do it. And so for some people, then they don't need to, because when the threat comes on, it's not inescapable. They know that they can. And for other people, they might turn on the little book light for 20 seconds and scan the room. And then their body, not their mind, but their body is able to sense that they're safe. They could turn it back off, and that may be all they need the whole time. And then there's other people who may weave in and out and turn on that light more than just once, or come out of the dark. And that what we've seen is, it doesn't actually matter if somebody stays in the dark the entire 3 to 4 days that they've committed to. Somebody could weave in and out of the dark 20 or 30 times and have a profoundly deeper experience than somebody who stayed in for 3 to 4 days. Like, it's completely irrelevant, because it's more rooted in someone being authentic, being honest, being sincere, prioritizing safety, and not prioritizing strength, endurance, and like this, like, I can do it. Yes, you can do it. You could stay in the dark for so long, but like, is that really the authentic movement? Is that really feel safe in your body? And what's the gain besides, like, I completed it? If there's this true movement into attuning to these deeper parts of us, there's like a sensitivity and a subtlety and a softness and a vulnerability that has us drop. And being armored and strong doesn't really have us softly going within. And I don't know if you want to share a
Very
little bit
beautiful.
about your, and one other thing on that, and then anything you could share on that is, like, for some people, the most profound life-changing thing they could do would be to turn on the light or to come out. Like, that would be the movement where they actually honor what's real for them, where they are no longer, we've been habituated to endure and to overcome all the hardships and challenges. And in a lot of cases in our life, or in many, we need to. And that's just like the appropriate response. But there's also many times where we don't. But it's become such a habituated movement that we harden, we move on, and we don't even notice that we're hardened. We're just like, this is how we do things. And that moment to just be like, fuck, I can't do it. And that's okay, drops
Yeah.
us into actually a sense of softness and realness of what's really here when we're not postured. And so for some people, turning on the light or coming out of the dark is the most profound thing they can do, which opens a door, which really brings them into a deeper level of newness and authenticity.
Yes. Yes. And I remember, of course, having that conversation with you about it isn't an option to go outside. I am stuck in here. I am in a cell essentially, and I can't get out. And you helping me work through that and allow myself to have the permission, to give myself the permission to do it. And I remember later or the next day when I actually allowed myself to go outside for the first time, I, opened the door and I kind of peeked out, and it was this sort of feeling of like, can I really? Am I allowed? Is this okay? And slowly making my way up the stairs and getting to that door and just going, is this actually okay? Am I? But then as the moment that I stepped outside and it was foggy and dark and I just started sobbing. And it was like, yes, everything in my body was just saying, yes, yes, yes. You needed this space. You needed to feel the air again. And I stood outside for a couple of minutes and then went back inside. And it was as if I was back in a safe cocoon instead of feeling like I was stuck.
Nice. So like right there, like that's that moment that we explore with a lot of people of like the difference between I should and I could stay in the dark and I want to. And like that's such a different feeling. And when it's the like I should and I could, it's not really the truer, more authentic kind of movement in us. It's kind of the should and the could. The should is going to come from an overlay of how we think we should do based on cultural standards and norms. So it's not really, it's pretty shallow. And then the could come more from like this strength and endurance. And again, sometimes in life that is necessary to survive, but like this isn't survival here. This is like an experience, an exploration of authenticity and depth and what's there when everything's gone. And so for many people, I would say actually for every person who's come here who leans into their authentic, nurture filled movement to turn on the light or to step out, when they go back in, it's an entirely new experience because they want to be there. And then there's this thing of like they're not trapped. It's not an inescapable threat. And when more waves of pressure and difficulty and discomfort and overwhelm come, they know that they can leave. Even if they don't, they know that they can leave. And so there's this almost new quality of capacity to be with. There's this level of trust of like, I'm going to like, safety is going to come first. And so something new moves in somebody that actually brings them a deeper, larger capacity to be with what's challenging, what someone doesn't want to be with, without managing it, changing it, fixing it, trying to transform it. It's just like, what if it's okay to be afraid? Like, what if it's okay to be afraid? What if it's okay to feel broken? What if it's okay to feel lack? Like, these are things that we don't actually genuinely feel okay with. And like somebody could conceptually be like, yeah, it's okay to be afraid and feel lack. And it's like, yeah, it's okay for like 5 or 10 seconds. But like when you really let that in the dark, you don't know if it's going to change. Like when you really let in, what if it's okay to be afraid? What if it's okay to have lack? It's like there's not this, you're not sure when it's going to go away. I remember there was a woman in there some years ago, and I went up, and she was really sad. She had been sad for years. She had been in therapy. And when she was in there and we were chatting, and there was something around, she was just like, I'm sad. And my question, it was something of like, what if it's okay to feel this way? And she's just like, but I'm afraid it'll never go away. And we talked about it some more. And when I came back up the next day, she was so happy. She had moved through it. She was like, you know what? The moment I actually genuinely accepted it and let it be here, without like, how long is it going to be here? Is it going to move, the change? She's like, it just like the whole thing changed immediately. And
Yeah.
I could see that for myself. I had thought of her 6 months later. I think this was 2 or 3 years ago. I was in something, I was feeling really funky, and I was like, I'm going to go for a run. I know how to move this energy. I'm going to work it. And I had thought of her, and I was like, I'm not going to try to fix it or change it. I'm just going to lay here with it. And I could feel the pressure in my psyche of like, but then it's not going to change. Like, you're just going to sit here and feel funky and just like let it be here. Like, so that level of curiosity, of willingness, of sincerity, of honesty, of like, what if it's okay to be afraid? What if it's okay to feel lack? What if it's okay to feel abandoned and alone? And whereas most of us could say, yes, it's fine. But again, it's a whole different thing in the dark when nothing's changing. So you're not like, yeah, and then in 10 minutes, somebody's going to come and we're going to go do something else. It's just like, no, there's this sense that it may not change. And so the quality of being with in the dark is something unlike anything else. Like when you're with it, and when you're genuinely with it, and you let it in, and you let it pierce you, and you let it really vibrate in you without buffering it and protecting yourself and trying to change it has a really unique quality. You're confronted in a way that you're just not ever used to. And in that movement of you, of being receptive, of including it, there's something else that we begin to discover that comes online in the dark that really is uniquely birthed there. And it's almost like the willingness, the real genuine sincerity of being afraid, of being helpless, of being vulnerable. Like, that is the doorway in the dark to these previously unknown depths. Like, we don't get to muscle our way through there. It's not like the spiritual warrior or the hero doesn't get to like find its way. It's like, it's so beyond any movement that we currently know. There's no tools or techniques that are going to really get us into these new depths. It's a total surrender. It's a willingness to feel things that we really didn't know we didn't even have permission to feel.
Yeah. I mean, in the dark, there really is that sense of everything and nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're so used to being bombarded with information and data and things coming at us. But then to feel that this is everything that is in me, and then there's also nothing to distract me or to keep me from feeling it, is just so powerful.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, one of the, to wrap up the threat responses, because we went off on a whole other tangent. So we did freeze and we did fight. And flight is one that has a much bigger spectrum of like, one end of flight is like panic, overwhelm. I want to get the hell out of here. I'd say most people experience, I want to get the hell out of here on some level multiple times, but it quickly gets tamped down because that's not a possibility. You can't get the hell out of here. I'm trapped. I have to do it. I would be a failure. Those aren't the thoughts that really go through most people's head. It's just not even an option. So again, it's just like, there's dismissing these parts of ourselves that are real and true because they're held up against the ideals of how we're supposed to be.
Yes.
Which is one reason why we don't really bring any specific techniques or spiritual stuff. It's just like, we've really done our best to strip it down. There's these things we'll introduce so people can explore what's happening in their body, and they can get in touch what's real for them. And there's not this idea of like getting anywhere else but what your honest, authentic experience is. And then
Yeah.
maybe the deeper levels of it, once we even just hit the very surface level of like, here I am in contact with the room, what does it feel like to be contact with the room? People are like, I came for a spiritual experience and you just want me to like feel the floor and like hold this pillow against my chest. And it's like, well, we're just going to start with what's real, and then from there we develop the capacity and the sensitivities to feel more of the subtleties. And so
Yes.
that one end
And
of the
by the
spectrum.
end,
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say that, and by the end, holding a pillow does feel like a spiritual experience.
Aha.
And you're so grateful for that pillow or that bed to be there. I remember, I mean, I teared up saying how grateful I was for every little aspect of that room. You know, how much I loved that beautiful big bathtub you have, and how much I loved that cozy bed and the zero gravity chair, and even the thoughtfulness of not putting a door on the bathroom because who needs a door in a bathroom in the dark? And so by the end, I was just like, I love all of this. I'm so grateful for all of it. And
Hmm.
that is the spiritual experience.
Yeah. Yeah. There's in that, like with the pillow that you mentioned, like this is a thing we use now all the time where like we have somebody grab a pillow and hold it against their chest. And I always still sometimes feel a little strange when there's just some like big, strong, burly men in there. And I'm like, will you just grab a pillow and we're just going to like hug it against our chest and like, but the I've never had anyone be like, this is dumb all of a sudden, because you're in the dark. And once someone just tastes a little bit of extra comfort, it's like, holy, my whole system just relaxed. I'm hugging a pillow. It's a little strange, but like, it doesn't matter. This feels amazing. And I've had so many people from embracing the pillow and then a whole process around it come out of overwhelm, panic, fear, pressure, just like all of these nervous system responses, because there's a sense of comfort and there's just a starting to come back into one's body. But we're coming back into one's body in a sense of safety, where like where the pillow meets the chest, like this. And somebody does, there's a level of sensitivity that just comes online in the dark because our senses aren't pulled. So it's like people can feel the nuances of the warmth of where the pillow meets their chest. And then we can like just drop into how good it feels to just feel warm, to feel comfortable. And like we don't get to feel that much in our life. All of a sudden, just feeling safe, when somebody genuinely is feeling safe in the dark, it's enough. Someone's like, now what's next? It's just like this is what it feels like. This is enough. And then from there, there is a natural dropping to deeper levels of subtleties and delicacies that we weren't aware of, but we start with just a very surface level felt sense of safety, which in a sense is all that's really needed in there. Like people can have all the tools and the tricks, but sometimes they tend to be, they're being done because someone's not just genuinely feeling safe. Once somebody feels safe and settled in their body, all those things can be done, but they're done with a different quality. There's not as much weight of achieving something through them. It's more of this relaxed exploration and curiosity than a lot of weight on the goal of doing that thing. And so that the flight in there of that one end of the spectrum of panic, overwhelm, the other end of the spectrum, it gets a little bit more tricky to see. It's really, most people aren't able to see it on their own because it's got such a beautiful positive lens. And it's when people really wonderfully fantasize about their life going
Yes.
home. I love my husband. I love my dog. I love my wife and my kids. I can't wait to see them. And it's not like thinking about them for 5, 10 minutes. This is like hours. I come up and it's like, how you doing? And they're like, it's good. I've just been thinking about my family. And like, I have this amazing idea. When I get out of here, I'm going to do this. And there's like so much excitement around one's life. And so it's hard to notice it because it feels good, but it's like, it feels good in this little box. But when after somebody can share all about that, and they kind of feel complete. And then I'm like, so what are you noticing in your body? And they're like it's actually not feeling good in my body. But a moment ago everything was so amazing, but it was because that flight had someone living in their head. And most of us today just live in our head because, well, one, it's just hard to settle in the body and we're just so distracted, but two, it's just really not that safe feeling in our body, and we don't realize the extent of that until we get into the dark and we're confronted with where we actually are and where we don't feel safe and where it actually feels threatened to feel safe. And this is a has come up a number of times with a few people, where when we do the pillow, like I'll have somebody lean against the wall or lay down or lean on something, so that like we're really going for this effect of where someone's not holding themselves up at all. Like you can lean your head back. There's nothing, so that you can begin to feel what it feels like in your body to feel supported. And so your front of your chest is covered, your back. And for some people, once there's this, what does it feel like in your body to feel supported and held? For some people, they're like, whoa, like it doesn't feel right. Like I almost feel like I don't deserve to be supported or held, or like it feels threatening to feel supported and held. And that comes up for some people. We stay with that, we explore that. It tends to then shift into something else when someone's willing to, like, what does it feel like to feel hesitant to let yourself feel held? Because many of us have developed such a sense of insulated safety and being hard and armored, that like when we let ourselves feel held, we start to feel those parts of us that are vulnerable and exposed and scared, that it doesn't feel right. That's like our system's telling us, no, you gotta like be on guard. And so that's been, yeah, it's so unique for each person that I'm constantly learning from each person that comes through here. And so the offering, the how we are with people, is constantly evolving, changing, refining as each unique person comes through here with their unique experience.
Yes. I love it. Beautiful. Okay. I'm going to have to bring things to a close here because I really need to honor your time.
Yeah,
and
we'll wrap it up.
and I could talk to you for hours more probably about the darkness, but alas, the world.
We
So
do live within
where should
time.
people find you, and where could they maybe sign up for a darkness retreat? Although everybody, there is like a 3-year wait list. So
Yeah, so we are booked out quite a bit. There are at times cancellations and slots that open. So we do encourage people to still reach out, get on the standby list. We're also in the process of exploring an expansion, which there's a chance we may begin this spring or later this summer. And then we'll have more spaces available before then. And like one part of, in short, of the expansion, not necessarily just to have more spaces available, but to continue to evolve and refine the offering. Like we've seen so much benefit in the people who have wove in and out of the dark. And so then when they're in the dark, they want to be there, they can come out, they start to establish more safety and trust. And so we'll start to offer some more curated, the orchestrated dark retreat, kind of more programs where there is more weaving in and out of a dark, and we start to explore with different lengths of time, different degrees of support, so that we can continue to, at the same time, kind of match. Like you don't want too much exposure because then it's too overwhelming. Not enough exposure is just like, it's not like it's going to be a spa retreat. So where to find that middle ground of where there's enough exposure balanced with enough nurture, that like the depth is really able to come in, while we also kind of still really ride on the nurturing, soft, gentle current. So our website, skycaveretreats.com, and you can find us on Instagram and YouTube. We share the videos of people coming out, and longer form ones too at times on the website and on YouTube.
beautiful. I cannot wait to see what you come up with next, because I just have to say again that doing this experience was absolutely one of the most profound experiences of my life. And I'm so grateful that you do it.
Thanks, Kelly. It was really sweet being here with you, and sweet being here with you today.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for being part of the Happy Rebel podcast community. Stay connected with us on Instagram at Happy Rebel. If you've enjoyed our episodes, please consider rating, liking, and reviewing the podcast. It truly does help us grow. Until next time, this is Kelly Street. Remember, embrace the dark and the light.